Okay, thought I'd sit down here and make a little video about these Bachman N-scale dd40s. I popped out a couple of these. They're not the Spectrum line. They have DCC but no sound. They were about $79. Certainly a budget locomotive. They look pretty good, except for the truck detail does not look very good, I don't think. However, that's minor, I guess. These are virtually identical except for the number on them. However, this one out of the box worked quite nicely. Low speed works pretty well, and it's fairly quiet. Not perfect, not as good as a Kato. My preference is the Katos. I really prefer those locomotives, but these aren't bad for 79 bucks. So this one's good. This one, however, sounds like an O-gauge Lionel when you start it up. It moans, it groans, it buzzes, it hums. It sounds horrible. It runs, but it sounds horrible. So I decided I wasn't going to try to send this thing back and screw around with that being a budget loco. I figured I'd take it apart and see if I could figure out what was going on with it. So I'm going to show you how to do that and what I ended up doing. You start by popping the bottom off the locomotive here, and that turns out to make a nice tray for putting your screws in. And then I used my utility knife here to pop up here. Here. And on the side of the cab, there's a little railing there, and there's a little one up front here. You gotta pop those loose with one on the other side. Both sides have the same things. Make sure to pop those loose so you don't break them. I'm gonna pop the cab off, and then this shell will come off, and then we'll work the railings up like that. Okay, until we get to this point here. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay. Alright. So, this across the top is the light board. And underneath the light board right here, in this area, this is where the decoder's at. Okay, and on the top of this board there's right here a screw, and there's a screw over here, and we need to loosen those up and remove them. So 1, 2, okay, now that removes the light board. Underneath the light board up front, there's this little plastic clip right here, and the light board sets on top of that. But this snaps on either side of the chassis, and that has to be removed in order to separate the chassis halves. I'll set that right there. Now, right up front here, I don't know how well you can see this or how focused it's going to be, but there's another little light board right here. There's a little screw in it, and that joins to one half of the chassis, and then there's a pin on the other side of the chassis. So when you go to separate these chassis halves, you have to make sure that this board is unclipped from this pin, or you're going to eventually probably break it trying to pry the two halves apart. So watch out for that. We flip it over, and there's 3 Phillips screwdrivers here, here, here. We're going to remove those screws. Okay, like that. Get all those loose. On the other side, there's these little square inserts right here, and that's what the screws thread into. And I've had them fall out, I've had them not fall out. Some of the screws. Oop, there went all the trucks. One of the trucks already fell out. Push these screws through. Okay, so we'll set that truck aside. That's the rear. Okay, now we'll pull up in the back here, pop the board off of that pin, there we go, and this half of the chassis comes off. Now here we got, this is a dual motor design, flywheels on them, both of them. It's 16-wheel drive, so both sets of trucks drive. And what you got to do, you wouldn't have to pull these little yellow motor mounts if it wasn't for the fact that the end of the shaft is obscured on the one end of the motor. So we need to remove these. And they have 3 little pins on the one side. There's one here, here, and here. And they engage with the end of the motor. There's 3 little holes drilled into that. And I'm not going to remove the other one because it really isn't necessary to show you here. But right where the shaft enters the motors they're bushed. They're not bearings. And I took a little drop of lightweight oil and added it right to where the shaft enters the motor on each one to lubricate those bushings. So you have 4 lube points, 2 per motor. So I started with that, and I put a little drop of oil on this worm gears on the trucks. I'm not so convinced that that really helped any. It may have, it may not have. I really think lubing the motors is what cured the problem, but at any rate the noise is mostly gone, and it's comparable to the other one that I got out of the box that was fine. This to me is a direct result of Bachman's poor quality control. They've been known for poor quality for quite a few years. I think they're getting better, but they still have work to do. Their Spectrum line of locos is much better. I own one, a Spectrum, and it's nice. I really like it. It's a steam locomotive, and it's just whisper quiet when you have the power, or when you have the sound turned off on that locomotive. It is very, very quiet, and I was really, really impressed with that. So anyways, that's what I did for lubing this. Now to reassemble, you've got to put this motor mount back in. That can be a little tricky, but it's not too bad. So this sets over the motor, the shaft, like that, and you got to get it. The pins locked into the. There we go, locked into the end of the motor, and then just drop that motor back in place. One other thing I'll point out is right underneath the decoder, between the decoder and the chassis, there's this little thin piece of clear acetate. So make sure not to lose that. That's a little insulator, so you don't have a problem with your decoder grounding out or something on the chassis. Okay, so now to put this back in, you've got this drive shaft coming off the truck. You've got to get that lined up to fit in the yoke there at the end of the motor. And there's 2 pickups on each one of these sets of trucks. They're brass. There's one here, and there's one on the other side, and they got a contact on the outside of this chassis. They don't go inside the chassis. You can see here on this chassis half, right where those contacts rub, here and here. And those same marks coincide with the other half of the chassis where the contact on the other side of the truck. That's where your power comes from. If those aren't in the correct position, the locomotive won't run. Okay? So same thing here with this truck. Try to get this shaft engaged with the motor. It's not difficult, but it does have to be properly aligned before you can even get it to slide into the yoke on the end of the motor. Okay, so right there. Alright, and now we'll take our other half of our chassis, slide this back on here. Be mindful of this board, a little light board up front that snaps over that pin. You don't want to break it. Okay. A little tricky. You got two trucks that are trying to fall out on you while you're trying to put this thing together, and you're trying to get these two halves together all at the same time. But oh, see there, my truck fell out because I didn't have it all the way together up front here. Okay, so let's do this again. Get back in there. See, I've had this part a couple times already, and it's still, I don't want to say it's difficult, but so a little tricky getting everything lined up here. Okay. Alright. There we go. Now it's all together. While I was doing that, that clear piece of acetate that I told you about came popping out. So we're going to slide that back in there. Okay. The trucks are locked in place. Everything's good there. Okay. Now we need to put in these little square blocks that the screws thread into. And I'm going to take, this is that little snap clip they told you about underneath the light board here. I'm going to snap that back in place. Does that actually help hold it together while you're assembling it? Okay. And we got another one of these little threaded mounts here to pop back in the middle. Get them just right to get them to drop in. It can be a little frustrating. There we go. Okay, turn it over here. Be careful not to lose your grip on this thing or it's all going to fall apart on you. So I start with the middle screw. That way we can get that one snugged up and we don't have to worry about things falling apart. There we go. Now we're good. Trucks move freely. Contacts are in the correct locations. So we're all good there. Alright, let's put our other two screws in. Okay. And one more up front. Like that. Now our chassis is reassembled. Now we just have to remount our light board here. So make sure you don't have any pinched wiring or anything. Set it down in place on top of the mounts. There's a little pin right up front, an alignment pin. It's got to be in the right spot, or this is a flashing LED. for the beacon on the top of the locomotive. That's got to line up with the hole in the top of the cab right here. So the board has to be positioned just right. And it's not difficult to do. I'm just making the point that if for some reason it's out of alignment, you probably won't be able to put that cab back on. Drop that one in place. Also another alignment pin at the back here too. The board, it kind of snaps in place. It doesn't hold it, but you can tell when it seats properly. If I like these well enough, I might upgrade them with sound. No, I haven't looked. I don't know if they've got a drop-in sound decoder for this or not, but so anyways, that's all there was to it. Just a little oil job on those motor shafts. Just some lightweight oil, and I put a little bit on the worm gear for the trucks, and the problem definitely improved to the point where it was at least tolerable to operate, because before it was not tolerable, let's put it that way. Okay, to reassemble this now, you take your railings. Be mindful of what's the front and what's the rear. It's not hard to figure out. Just be mindful of it, otherwise you're not going to be able to put it back together. And we'll slide. Come on. Get on there. There you go. Down the chassis. Should pop right on. I have to lift this front back up again a little bit. This is probably the hardest part, really. Other than the first time around when I put those trucks on, it was a real challenge. But I've had this thing apart a few times now. I'm just playing around with it, making this video. Etc., etc. So it's gotten easier now that I know how to do it. Alright, so we'll take our cab, and this interlocks with this shell, like that. We'll just slide this back down in here. And for many of you out there, you probably had locomotives apart, and this video is probably redundant and ridiculous. However, I'm making this for people like me that had started out at one point and didn't have a clue what they were doing. And maybe they just need a little guidance, just a little idea. So this is why I'm doing this. This fuel tank, it just pops right back on. There is a front and a back. There's a notch cut out on the one side for where this ladder's at. So if you try to put it on backwards, you can't get it on. And that's all there is to it. So let me power up the track. Let's see what we got here. I should have done a video before I did this to illustrate the difference. But there we go. here. But it's running quiet and smoothly. It's got a little bit of a hum to it, but considerably better than it was before. So there we go. And that's you know, that's all it takes to do that. It's an easy job to do, and made all the world of difference in the operation of that locomotive. So I'm going to pull this camera off the pod here. Let's see. We're coming out of the tunnel. Let's see if you can hear it when it comes by. So not too bad. Again, there's a little buzz, but nothing too awful. Definitely not Kato quality. There's no doubt about that. But for 79 bucks, you know, it's half the price of a Kato also. So, I'm pleased. You know, it's not difficult. Give it a shot. You know, what do you got to lose, right? If it doesn't make it quieter, then you know you haven't lost anything. Just run the thing and be done with it. I thought running it initially, just to run it, would quiet it down, and that did not happen. I ran it and ran it and ran it and ran it and ran it. And I ran this train for probably 4 hours straight, and it made no difference at all in the way it sounded. So there we go. Good luck. I hope this helps.